right. Happy Thursday, everybody. Thursday evening, we're coming at you. And you can search for The Other Side with Margison and Spears on Facebook and find us. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on YouTube. And now you can find us on iTunes. Thanks to Justin for putting that together. You can do a search on iTunes for The Other Side with Margison and Spears, and you can find any of the old episodes that we've done. You can download them to your device, and now you can listen to them in your car if you're driving. I got like a half an hour drive to work. That's when I usually do my podcast. But Justin, thank you for putting that together. First of all, anything that is even semi-modern with The Other Side is completely done by Justin. If it was me, it would be like a stone and chisel. So thanks for putting that together, Justin.
Hey, you bet. Not a problem.
You can also email the show, margisonandspears@gmail.com. We want to welcome our listeners on WCVL 92.1 FM, 1550 AM, or if you're listening on WCVLAM.com. And we also want to thank our sponsor, Common Sense Products. Justin, tell us a little bit about Common Sense Products.
Yeah, this is a fact, Mike. There are over 230 million cars and trucks on the U.S. roads today. And it's also a fact that most car owners believe that they have to change their oil every 3,000 miles. It's also a fact that oil doesn't wear out. It becomes contaminated. And the most popular brand of oil filters are effective down to 30 microns at best. Many major oil companies are selling recycled motor oil today. That's used oil. Oil doesn't wear out. Super filter your oil with the 1 micron filtering system. The Poly filter is easy to use and can be used for many years. You can get a kit that includes 2 washable filters and what to watch for in used oil, where to find oil, and how to market filtered oil to others if you wish. Now, you can do this. It's very simple. All you have to do is send $20 cash, check, or money order to Common Sense Products, P.O. Box 172, New Richmond, Indiana, 47967. Look, tax and shipping are paid. That's Common Sense Products, P.O. Box 172, New Richmond, Indiana, 47967. And thank you to Common Sense for supporting The Other Side.
Yeah, thank you, Common Sense. And Justin, I don't know how you're not a professional radio ad reader.
Well, that took seconds of rehearsal.
All right, we are going to go old school on The Other Side tonight. We're going to do what we originally intended when we thought up this podcast, which is find places in the social studies curriculum where the textbook and the standards just get it wrong. So we have picked apart our textbooks and we're going to lay out where they have failed you the most. And I'll be honest, when I was putting my list, I have so many things here on the cutting room floor that I really wish we could talk about. And honestly, Justin, this is going to turn into a huge list of shows that we can just, put in line coming up. And we actually don't do a whole lot of history on here. We try and stick to government and econ because Justin is mainly a government teacher. I'm mainly an economics teacher, but he loves history. I love history. And some of the stuff that didn't make the cut here, Justin, I wanted to talk about the other side of the Crusades, the other side of World War I, the other side of the slave trade, the other side of recessions, the other side of Senator Joe McCarthy. I just had a bunch of stuff, but I was looking back on it. I was like, any of these would make great episodes for the future. So maybe we can cycle back to one of these if we're starting to run dry in the future. But I did have to narrow it down, and I ended up settling on 2 things that I thought were ultimately important. And tonight I am going to be talking first about the Industrial Revolution here in America, and second, if I get to it, the New Deal. But primarily I wanted to talk about the Industrial Revolution. When I'm talking about this period in time-wise, we're talking roughly post-Civil War, so after 1865, lasting to about, the Great Depression. And there's no real dates for the Industrial Revolution because there was industry, of course, prior to the Civil War, and there was, industry, of course, after the Great Depression. But this time period kind of encapsulates the transition of the economy, like really from agricultural to industrial. So that's the time period I'm going to focus on. And I think if you were to ask anybody who is either a high school graduate or maybe a college student or a researcher, ask somebody who is paying attention at some point in U.S. history class, tell me about the Industrial Revolution, or what can you tell me about the Industrial Revolution? I think you'd probably get the same responses. You might hear factories, you might hear dirty working conditions, child labor, unsafe mines, unsafe machines, low wages, shoddy tenements, bad living conditions. And they may, derisively refer to it as the Gilded Age. They might refer to the major players as the robber barons. And to me, this is so appalling because this period marks what I feel is the greatest period of advancement in human history. This time, if we take like 1870 to 1930, there's no other 60-year period or 100-year period or 200-year period anywhere on the planet during any time did human beings advance further than they did during this time period. Yet all anybody talks about is the negatives. I mean, and when I talk about advancements, like the most important human advancements, I'm talking about not just, oh, we got a car, although that was important. We're talking about going from dark to light, and not just light bulbs, electric grids. We're talking about going from subsistence to consumption. We're talking about going from wells to faucets, from isolated as a country to connected, from helplessly sick to cured. I mean, it's unbelievable. How this time period is described in negative terms is beyond me. Now, if we want to nitpick, which people do, and I think it's nitpicking by applying today's standards of acceptability to 150 years, to the 1870s, that is about as purposeless an exercise as I can imagine. It does us no good to apply what we would consider, decent working standards today to a time period when industrialization had never been tried before and was just beginning. Yet this passes as academic, and it's ultimately frustrating. People's lives are enriched beyond their wildest dreams in a millisecond in time. And the smartest thing that we can say is, oh, well, factory wages weren't high enough, or children worked. Well, when didn't children work? I mean, was there some other time prior to that in history that I'm not aware of when children didn't work? I mean, children working has been the rule in every society since the dawn of man, yet we're outraged about it for, some reason specific to this time period. Can we just consider the fact that factory wages combined with household inventions, combined with food processing and shipment meant for the first time in human history, kids no longer had to work? Or is it just that, that doesn't fit the narrative that the United States under its capitalist system is just pure evil from start to finish? Oh, I'm getting worked up here, Justin. I got to be honest with you. What else do they say about the Industrial Revolution? Okay, how about this one? How about predatory pricing? Do you know what this is, Justin? Have you heard this?
I have heard this before, but fill us in a little bit more here.
Predatory pricing. This is another thing that absolutely bugs me. This is when a big company will use its clout and its power and its finances to sell products below cost, something that other smaller businesses can't do. And they can sell products at below cost. They can monopolize the market and ultimately drive all other competitors in the industry out of business. And then once they've gotten rid of their competition, they just jack the prices up to exorbitant rates. Now, this is particularly shameful because it's taught. I know it's taught, yet it never happened. There are no examples of it actually occurring in United States history. There was one example that I came across of some German, I think he was a chemical engineer, and I don't even remember exactly what the industry was, if it was pharmaceuticals or what, but trying it, and then he crashed and burned. But other than that, nobody has been able to come up with an example where this has actually happened. And I came across a quote from a guy named George Stigler. George Stigler is an economic professor at the esteemed University of Chicago Department of Economics. And Stigler has gone so far as to say, quote, "Today it would be embarrassing to encounter this argument in professional discourse. Yet we hear it all the time. This is stuff that just didn't happen. And usually when the textbook talks about, Rockefeller or Carnegie or Vanderbilt or whatever, they talk about predatory pricing, or if they don't directly talk about predatory pricing, they talk about how rich they were, and just how bad that was, how rich they were. I'm going to take you through our textbook here for a second so I can kind of describe. I know this is going to make for terrible radio, right? I'm reading from an economics textbook on the radio, but I'm not actually going to read from it. I am going to try and describe to you what I'm looking at. But this is important for people to understand just what our kids are exposed to when they're taught this time period. And again, this, in my opinion, represents the greatest advancement, the most human progress in history anywhere on the planet at any time at all during human history. And the chapter starts with, it's called Issues of the Gilded Age. And what I'm looking at here on the very first page is these people dressed in extremely nice clothing, and they're smiling and they look happy. You can tell they're very affluent. And the caption here says, wealthy people had the pleasure of enjoying leisure time. This group takes a rest from an afternoon of golf. This is the picture that's used to introduce the Gilded Age. And then there's a quote off to the side. This is kind of like an infographic. You have to imagine there's a quote off to the side, and the I guess title of it says Paupers and Millionaires. And then the quotation reads, we meet in the midst of a nation brought to the verge of moral, political, and material ruin. Corruption dominates the ballot box, the legislatures, the Congress. The people are demoralized. The fruits of the toil of millions are boldly stolen to build up the colossal fortunes. We breed two great classes, paupers and millionaires. Spoken by Ignatius Donnelly, who was running for Congress on the populist platform in Nebraska in 1892. But this is how it's kicked off. So we can already tell the kind of negative sense that it's going to begin with. And as I go through the chapter here, I'm just going to tell you the headings of each section. I mean, these are just the headings. I'm not going to read you what's in it, but heading number 1, African Americans lose freedoms. African Americans oppose injustices. Chinese immigrants face discrimination. Mexican Americans struggle in the West. Women make gains but suffer setbacks. And that's the end of section 1. I mean, if I were to ask you, Justin, do you think this was predominantly a positive or a negative time, and you knew nothing other than the headings of the chapter, what would you answer?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's very clear which way they're making this look out to be.
And then I'm going to skip to the next chapter, which is titled The Progressive Era. And progressive then means the exact same thing that progressive does now. They might as well call it the liberal era. But after the Gilded Age, the next chapter is the Progressive Era. There was more to the chapter too. I just went through the first section, but then it goes on to talk about economic problems and social problems and so on and so forth. And then it skips here to the Progressive era for time purposes. I'm gonna cut through this a little bit quicker, but here we have a picture, not surprisingly, of children, probably age 10-ish, I'm guessing, faces dirty from being in the coal mines. Again, this is the first picture in the chapter, section 1, these 3 kids with coal on their faces. And title here, it says Children in the Coal Mines. Progressive reformers were appalled by the child labor that was common in coal mines, textile mills, and other industries. John Spargo, a union organizer and socialist, sadly described the terrible conditions endured by boys working in coal mines. And then they go on to talk about the progressives in this chapter. And we have the origins of progressivism. Progressives share a common belief. Progressives target a variety of problems. Do you notice how we're getting a little bit more positive here, Justin? This is an entire chapter about progressives, yet it's starting to get just a little stunningly more positive. Journalists uncover injustices. Okay, so the media doing their job as superheroes. Novelists defend the downtrodden. And then they talk about Upton Sinclair, of course, the great communist writer.
Yeah, and
settlement.
I'm surprised here, Mike. Sorry to jump in. I'm
No,
surprised that
go
you
ahead.
left out the chapter where they talk about the robber barons and these big companies walking into the homes of people with guns and forcing them into these jobs.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It's forcing them to take these jobs at gunpoint. No, I don't think it actually happened that way. Although if you went through this chapter, you would probably think that that was close. In fact, they don't mention um, anything that Rockefeller did. They don't mention the fact that kerosene was 30 cents per. God, I can't remember the unit. 30 cent. I don't know if it was an ounce or whatever, but the common unit. When Rockefeller began Standard Oil, it was about 30 cents, per unit. And at the end of it, when by the end of the century, the end of the 1800s, kerosene was 8 cents. I mean, people could now illuminate their homes on the cheap, and that was extremely important. Yet, what we're told is it was all monopolies, and that's not what monopolies do. They actually restrict output and keep prices high. But there's no evidence that this actually happened. Did Rockefeller restrict output? No. He in fact it made all of the investments to get the oil up out of the ground, and then he made use of it. Not only did you have oil that you could use for energy, but he made over 300 uses of the byproducts of oil because he just saw it all going to waste. And the price of these materials dropped drastically during Rockefeller's tenure. And Andrew Carnegie, it was the exact same thing. What happened to the price of steel? Just go and look at a chart. The price of steel plummeted. It's not like he restricted output and the prices went up. And then everything that steel was used in, be it cars or skyscrapers or railroads, Andrew Carnegie was responsible for completely revolutionizing the entire country. Yet this is not what we hear. His name is nowhere even in this chapter. We got reforming governors, progressive governors take charge. I'm going to go to the end here. And the last section in the chapter is progressivism leaves a lasting legacy. Starting in this period, the federal government grew to offer more protection to Americans' private lives, while at the same time gaining more control over people's lives. They actually say that as a positive thing. It's unbelievable. These people are shameless. It is true that many of the problems identified by the progressives still plague us today. There are still dishonest sellers, unfair employment practices, and problems in schools, cities, the environment, and public health. However, the progressive reformers passed on the idea that government can take an action to help people fix those problems. This is what our students are getting out of the textbook, that the Gilded Age was a bad time. Next chapter, government comes in and fixes the problems. It's wrong. It's dishonest. It's misleading. It's what Tom Woods calls educational malpractice. This is educational malpractice at its finest. Oh, I'd love to go into the New Deal here, Justin, but I just don't think I had time. I'm going to kick it over to you. What do you have for educational malpractice?
Well, I've got an issue that is a raging debate here today, and it really, as I'm trying to get my students in government today to recognize, is intertwined all throughout our society. If we look at public policy in the United States today, and by public policy, I'm basically referring to any issues in which the government is involved in coming up with some kind of a solution to the issue. So you could think maybe gay marriage, abortion, gun rights, immigration, you name it. Just basically anything where we look to the government for a solution. There's a raging debate going on between who has the authority in the government to offer these solutions. Should it come at the national level or at the state and local level? This is what we commonly refer to in history as federalism. Our system of government is an experimental form of government. It was one that, when it was instituted and used this idea of dividing power between a centralized, what we call the general government or national government. I don't call it the federal government. Because that's not actually accurate. It's the national government or the general government.
I've started calling it the general government since you brought that up. I'd never heard that before until you brought it up to me last year, and I've been trying to say general government.
Yeah, and I try as well. Sometimes I slip, but it's a key. I think it's a very key thing to understanding this. And so, the general or national government versus the state and local government. And what I tell my students is, you've got to think of power. You know, the Constitution defines power. It defines it in one of two ways: it grants power or it reserves power. Now, there are a number of ways in which you can grant power to another group, entity, individual. And this is an exercise that I walk the students through. If I were to say to you, Mike, I need you to go to the store and pick up some items for the house, maybe milk, bread, eggs, whatever. That's what I've told you. I've expressly told you that I want you to go to the store and I want you to get these items. Now, I've also then implied, right, that, you may take a vehicle to drive there, or that once you're there, you can use cash or credit or debit card. I haven't specifically told you, but I would expect you to have to pay for the groceries in some way. I haven't specifically told you what brands of items to buy. I'm implying that we need specific things, or even expressly saying it, but I haven't told you exactly what brands to get. So you get the idea here. And this is essentially what federalism is all about, right? But at the end of the day, there's only so much power. It's not an infinite amount; it's a finite amount of power. So, however you split it up, right? When you give power to one branch or one not branch, but one section of government, whether it be national or state and local, you're de facto keeping the power from the other side. Now, there are things called concurrent powers, right, which are powers that are shared by both the national government and the state government. Let me give our listeners an example here. Taxation. Taxation is a power that both the national government and state and local governments have. So this is a very, very important exercise to go through. And we spend a couple of days going through this because it's that important for the students to understand that. So I have had to go through the process of creating lessons all on my own and teaching this to the students, because what I did was I went and looked at the textbook. Now I'm reading from and I'm pulling from the standard textbook called Magruder's American Government, which any of our listeners out there that have taken U.S. history may be familiar with this textbook. It's been around for a long period of time. And I want to come back to that because I think it's a really important aspect to this in just a moment. But my book, my government book, kind of does the opposite of what the history book was doing that you read about. It starts off by identifying all these powers. And what it's doing is it's kind of like baiting the reader. It's baiting the student to getting you to think that, oh, the states are powerful. All of power resides in the states. The national government is handcuffed. It can't do its job because of the states. And if you think that I'm exaggerating here, let me read, and I'm going to read just excerpts here as well, Mike, for the listeners. And this is directly from the textbook and talking about reserve powers to the states. It says, in short, the sphere of powers held by each state, being the scope of the reserve powers, is huge. The states can do all of those things just mentioned, which it goes on to talk previously about. They can decide whether or not the sale of pornography would be legal, outlaw prostitution, permit functions of gambling, and permit others. So there's some things there. The states can do all these things just mentioned because the Constitution does not give the national government the power to do those things, and it does not deny the states the power to do them. So it's kind of hinting here a little bit at the 9th and 10th Amendment here. So it goes on in other sections, and I won't bore the listener with all of those, but as they talk about exclusive powers and concurrent powers, that essentially you get the idea in reading this, right, that it's the state governments. And in reality, I got to agree with them on that part. They're actually right. But here's where they screw it all up. Here's where they drop the bombshell. And this becomes a key component to the rest of the chapter. So after they do go through all this, there's a section called The Constitution Reigns Supreme. We just did this lesson today, as a matter of fact, in my government class, where we read through Article 6 of the Constitution, which contains the validity of debts. it contains the oath of office, but most importantly, it contains this thing called the Supremacy Clause, right? Which essentially says that the Constitution and all subsequent laws made, treaties made, are supreme, that state constitutions cannot in any way conflict with what the national Constitution has to say here. And in particular, this is kind of the point, the pivot point, right? The point where they really kind of go off the rails here. And this is what it says. The Supremacy Clause has been called, quote, the linchpin of the Constitution.
By
because
who?
because it joins the national government and the state governments. Now, listen to this. Listen very carefully to this. It joins the national government and the states into a single governmental unit. That is inaccurate. That's erroneous. That is wrong. That's the opposite of federalism. That's unitary government. You just sat here and told me through 3 pages of defining power that, oh yeah, powers are split between the national government and the state and local government. And really it's the state governments that are all powerful. And well, the national government can only do a couple of things that the Constitution grants it the expressed rights to do. But now you're trying to tell the student here, wait a second, this is one national unit, one single governmental unit called the federal government. In other words, the Supremacy Clause is the provision in the Constitution that makes the complex federal system a working reality. Now, don't let that just kind of pass. What they're saying there is that the system divided would never stand. It would never work. And you ought to ask yourself, what are they getting at here? Why are they saying that? Well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that the Federalists, right, they were doing everything they could to appease the anti-Federalists at the Constitutional Convention. The anti-Federalists were the states' rights advocates. They were the ones that were very concerned in the ratifying conventions at the state level that they were going to be giving up all of their power to this stronger national government. And so the book then jumps right into someone that I think everybody should take a moment to read a little bit more. I honestly need to read more about him. I know there's a lot of work right now being published about Hamilton. John Marshall, who fought in the Continental Army with Washington and was upset about the quote unquote indifference of the states in terms of not funding the Army and paying debts. When he becomes Supreme Court justice, he takes it out on the states and he grants national government authority beyond probably anything that would have been recognized by the founders. And this is what the anti-federalists were worried about. They were worried about a national government that would continue to encroach upon and take over states' rights. And from a federalist, a strong, ardent federalist position like Hamilton or Marshall, they thought the states were backwards. They were dumb. They were going to impede progress, right? You were talking about the progressive era. And you see this in no other greater example in American history than in, I believe it's 1868, the ratification of the 14th Amendment and what we get known as the Incorporation Doctrine, which takes the Bill of Rights, which are the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, which as they were written and ratified were checks on the national government against the citizens. And it takes all of that and says, okay, states, this is going to apply to you as well. You're not going to be able to do all of these things that the national government can't do as well. And this is just, again, erroneous. Many of the states weren't doing these things. If you read through state constitutions, there are the same guarantees and protections of natural rights and liberties that there is in the national constitution. So it really is just a consolidated power grab by the national government. And this is what you're getting by reading this. Now, I want to wrap up here. I've got, I think, just a few minutes left here. And I want to kind of make a point about this so that you don't think that I'm just kind of using hyperbole or making a mountain out of a molehill. This is really important because this Magruder's American Government textbook is widely used in school systems today. I did a little bit of research and I wasn't able to find a whole lot. I was hoping to be able to find some numbers, maybe some statistics about how many of these books might be out there or have been adopted by schools across the country. I do know that if you go to Pearson, who is the textbook producer of this, you can find all of the different versions of this that have been made for each individual state based on curriculum standards that have been adopted in the states. But here is just on Google Books, a quick synopsis excuse me, of what it says about this. Held as a stellar educational resource for nearly a century, Magruder's American Government is updated annually to meet the changing needs of today's high school students and teachers. The program's engaging narrative is enhanced with numerous primary sources, political cartoons, charts, graphs, and photos, yada, yada, yada. But I know you and I have both talked about this. Mike, do you want to take a guess at how many times in the Magruder's American Government textbook the word nullification appears?
I have two guesses, either 1,132 or 0.
Yes, that would be correct. That would be, as they said in Animal House, 0.0. Oh. I think it was as the dean told Bluto his GPA, 0.0. Secession. How often do you think secession is mentioned in the American Government, Magruder's American Government textbook?
I'm going to stick with my same answers, either one or the other.
Oh, you know what? You know what? They actually appeased us here. They put it in one time.
Oh,
it appears one time in the textbook, but have no fear. It's not, a secession is an option or secession has been debated. No, it mentions secession as from the point of 2 senators who supported secession and were promptly kicked out of Congress.
2 lunatics.
So,
huh?
Yeah, so no surprise there. So look, guys, what we just went through, the whole reason that we're doing this series is to bring attention to the fact that this curriculum that is taught in our school systems today, Mike, as you said it, our good friend Tom Woods says it, this is educational malpractice. And we wonder why we get things like what we've seen with the student movement out of Florida and people just fawning and falling all over themselves about how brave and civic and how outstanding this is. You know what? I do applaud the kids for having the audacity, I guess, to stand up and try to speak their mind, but they're so far from understanding what's going on. And it's, I kind of feel for them in a way because it's not really their fault. The system has let them down. The system has failed them. And that's really what you get when you use this kind of material. And I want to encourage any educational professional out there, any teacher, any curriculum writer, to please take this to heart. And I know that there are some out there that are fighting the good fight here, but please, hopefully you understand why we are feel so passionate about this is because we see what this does to students on a daily basis. So that's going to do it for our radio listeners. We do appreciate every Saturday that you join us on WCVLAM.com or 92.1 1550. We appreciate the time that you give in listening to the program. Please feel free to drop us a line if you have any questions or comments about the show. It's Margison and Spears at gmail.com. We would absolutely enjoy any criticism, comments, suggestions, anything. We would love to be able to hear from our audience, and we will reply to you as quickly as we can. So for those of you that are listening online on 1550 92.1, we thank you, and we'll be back next week when we are actually going to take on one of those topics that Mike mentioned. And we're going to tease you a little bit. I'm not going to give it away, but we are going to come back because when he mentioned those to me, there was one that really stood out that I said, we've got to cover that. So tune in next week when you will hear us talk about that. And until then, you've now heard The Other Side. All right, for those of you that have stuck on for bonus time on YouTube, again, we appreciate you sticking with us. Mike, wow, I kind of have to take a deep breath too.
Yeah, I got all worked up doing that.
Well, I think it really just kind of hits home, because we are in the trenches and, obviously we have a worldview that, revolves around what our classroom looks like and what our student population looks like. But, it really does fire you up when you think about the fact that there are kids sitting in classrooms on a daily basis, and this is what they're being fed.
And it's the only thing they're being fed. Mm-hmm. That is the whole point of our podcast. The other side does not exist. This is what's so frustrating. I just went through the entire 2 chapters, chapter 7 and chapter 8, Gilded Age and Progressivism. And if this was all you knew about the Industrial Revolution and then the subsequent time period, you would think that things were terrible, not the greatest time in human history, the biggest period of human advancement ever on the planet. You would think that times were terrible and then they were saved by the government. There is no other conclusions that a reasonable high school student could draw from this. I mean, it's just stunning.
Well, and I'm glad that you mentioned that too about the other side, because if anyone is listening to this, I want you to understand that I'm teaching 3 sections of economics right now. And I just spent about a week and a half going through and demonstrating why capitalism and free market is the best economic system available to us, and why it's far superior to obviously a traditional economy, socialism, communism. And at the end of it, I said, you know what, I want to put this to the test. So here's what I'm going to do. I've got this documentary that I've had in my back pocket, and I've shown it once or twice before in the past. I thought, you know what, I'm going to introduce it to my students here. We're coming up on spring break, and before we got out of town, I wanted them to see this as a criticism. And I encouraged them. I said, I want you to either defend or reject the free market based on what you're going to see here. And if any of the listeners want to check this out, it's called Walmart, The High Cost of Low Prices.
Oh, geez.
Okay. And so again, yeah, exactly what you said, right? I mean, we hear this and we know that this is complete garbage, baloney, whatever word you want to use for it. But I presented it in a very serious challenge to capitalism. And I went through with the students and I said, okay, let's critique it. Let's go through. And then we went back through and we talked about solutions. And what was, I guess it kind of floored me in a way. I had a lot of students who were using free market principles to reject some of what they saw. At the end of the day, I had students telling me, right, that okay, you just presented all of these bad things about supposedly what Walmart is doing, yet people are still shopping there. So they were able to articulate and tell me that that was the market that was speaking, that if Walmart isn't paying their employees a high enough wage or giving them good enough benefits, or they're not providing a safe environment for their shoppers, or they're using sweatshop labor, yada, 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 all these different things in this hit piece, then why are people still shopping there? The market is voicing its opinion on this, and they don't care enough about those things. Otherwise, if they did, they would be rejecting Walmart for Kohl's, for Kroger, for Kmart's, for Sears, for all of the other Targets and everything else, but they're not. They continue to show up because they value the low prices, they value the convenience, they value whatever it is. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the one-stop shop. Maybe what, I don't know. Maybe it's the closest thing to your house. At the end of the day, that doesn't matter. What matters is you vote with your dollars, right? And so they were expressing this to me. I did not guide them. I did not push them or nudge them toward that. They were verbalizing and expressing that to me. And so I wanted them to understand that I was presenting a serious challenge to the market. So it is also kind of an exercise in showing too that when you present students with alternative facts, they're usually able to rationalize and see the truth. It's kind of crazy how that works, right?
Well, we have some kids. I mean, I know in my economics class that I taught during fall trimester, I had one particular student who would come in with his uniform on, because he would take economics, and I think he had one other class, and then he would have to go off to work. And he worked at Walmart, and I asked him what he made, and he said, well, $10 an hour, which is pretty good. This isn't New York City, right? This is Crawfordsville, Indiana, and this is a high school kid. And again, that's the market speaking. The idea that Walmart pays, sub minimum wage pay to its employees is just false. And we actually got into this debate during that class. I remember I was driving by a McDonald's in town once, and it said now hiring third shift starting at $11 an hour. And I asked the kids, I said, what is this telling you? Like, what does this mean? And even the kids who, aren't going to pass the class, they go, they need workers. Yeah, absolutely. They need workers. McDonald's needs workers. And what that price represents is simple supply and demand. They demand labor, and there currently is an adequate supply. And when that's the case, you're going to have a relatively high price. And to be honest with you, $11 an hour to work at McDonald's, that's not all that bad. And if you have nothing else to do 24 hours a day, adjust your sleep schedule and you can get pretty good experience and you can get pretty good pay going in there during the third shift. But yeah, I mean, the idea, remember that, what was that other idiotic documentary about that tried to get McDonald's shut down? You know what I'm talking about?
Oh,
That moron.
yeah. Wasn't Super Size Me,
Yeah,
was it?
Super
Yeah,
Size Me.
Super
That's the
Size
one.
Me, yeah. Mhm.
And it didn't really talk about the economics of McDonald's, but it was a typical hit piece. And this is what they try to tell us about McDonald's is they serve you basically garbage, and they don't pay their employees anything. And meanwhile, the fat cats just rake in dough, and it's just a total misrepresentation of a decent American capitalist company that has succeeded by responding to the principles of supply and demand. That's it. And another thing about McDonald's, and I'm sure Walmart, you can say the same thing. I don't know what the levels of donations that Walmart gives, but if you wanted to shut Walmart down, or whoever made this, I think it was Greenwald who made that documentary that you're talking about, if he succeeded and shut Walmart down, think about all of the billions of dollars in charitable giving that would be taken away from kids who really need it. And this is the first thing that bugged me when that stupid documentary about McDonald's came out. If this guy, what's his name, Spurlock, I think, if he actually succeeded and got McDonald's shut down, what about the Ronald McDonald House? Which these are charitable dollars given by McDonald's so that families can stay close to their loved ones. Kids were in the hospital for extended period of time. Does he want that to go away? Would that make him happy? It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, and you know what? To kind of put a bow on this end of it too, one of the things that tie it back in is, you know what, Mike? It's this idea, and I think this is what really I have a hard time hearing progressives talk about, and I just don't get it. I don't understand it. It's that you're too stupid to be able to make the decision on your own. You're too dumb to be able to know, like, hey, how much McDonald's should I eat? Or, where should I shop? And that decision needs to be made for you. And that decision needs to be made by some bureaucrat 3,000 miles away that knows nothing. Look, even I could make an argument, even my rep in Congress, Todd Rokita, how much does he really know about what I go through on a daily basis? Right. Yeah, exactly. And so this idea of like just blind faith and blind allegiance to wanting to give power and authority for these bureaucrats in DC to make decisions about what I should be able to put into my body or what I should be able to choose to do is just, I don't understand where this sense of faith in people comes from, because at all levels, people are evil. People make bad decisions. That's why you should decentralize power as much as you can and not let it get amassed by one person. I know we've said this in other ways too when we talk about how the people who claim that Trump is a Nazi are the same baboons that are out here yammering on about how you should be able to take guns away. It's like, why would you out of one side of your mouth call this guy Hitler and then say, oh yeah, by the way, go ahead and confiscate all of our guns? That's just, I don't understand that logic one bit at all.
Well, I don't think there's a ton of logic that goes into anti-Trump arguments. Honestly, I think those are probably the most passionate arguments that you'll, I guess, ever hear. I don't think there's any sort of substance or logic or anything that can make its way in there because the hatred is so thick. You know what I mean? I mean, have you ever seen anybody hate a particular figure as much as people hate Trump? I mean, I don't think people hated Adolf Hitler the way that people hate Trump.
Oh no, it is, and it's just completely unjustified. That's the thing. Like, there's just almost zero evidence for it. And look, I'm not a huge Trump fan from Trump the politician, but just to see the level of vitriol and hatred and Yeah, I mean, I have read some really, really disgusting things on social media about him, and it's unbelievable.
And
I
then
just don't get it.
you can't have a conversation. I mean, you cannot have a conversation anymore. We've talked about this a lot, so I don't want to rehash. And I know we're getting ready to close up here, but you honestly can't have a conversation when you have that level of passion driving your arguments. Because I can't say, you know, with the tax cuts. Now, I think polling has showed that it's almost a case closed on the tax cuts. Everybody likes them. I mean, if you go and you look at where the polling is now, Nancy Pelosi was calling this, she was saying this is Armageddon. This is going to be the worst possible thing for the nation. But she was just using these words that made it sound like, oh my gosh, you know? And at that time, the tax cuts were polling at like 40%. Then people actually got them. They realized that the world is not coming to an end. But you can't have a legitimate conversation about the merits of giving people some of their money back that they're already paying to the government, giving them a small percentage of it back. You can't have a legitimate discussion about that anymore because, there's too much hatred and passion.
No, you're absolutely right. And again, I hope people can get past this on both sides because Republicans are just as guilty of this as Democrats are, of this idea that there is this right mix of people out there. If we could just get these people elected, if we could
Paul
just get,
Ryan.
yeah, right. It's like, how many times, it's like the battered wife syndrome. How many times are you going to have to be let down by these people, no matter if there's an R or a D next to their name, before you realize it's the system, stupid. You're not going to find the right combination of people to run this thing. We've consolidated too much power and authority into a system of government that knows next to nothing about the people of the 50 states of this union. And to try to force everybody to live the same way, that's why you get this divisiveness. That's why you get people that are pushing back, because it's not natural. It's not natural to tell the people of Oregon that they have to live the same way as the people of Florida or the people of Arizona. There should be autonomy for these states to be able to have the leeway to run their day-to-day lives. And that's all we're asking for. But yet we're told if you don't fall in the line, if you don't go along with what the national government wants, then you're backwards and you're just, whatever other adjective they come up
You're
to.
wild-eyed. You're like,
yeah,
crazy.
Right. It's like we can still be united in common defense. I mean, when was the last time that this country was invaded by a foreign power? Like, I mean, why are we so worried about this idea that we've got to have this strong one nation, indivisible, all one mass United States of America simply for protection, this strong militarized nation? We're not under a threat to be invaded. If the largest invasion that's happening right now is through immigration, it's not through an invading foreign army. Now, I could keep going on and on. I'll need to stop here. But the whole idea is decentralized power. Look into it and give it a fair shot. Read about it. I think it will make sense, and maybe your eyes will be opened up.
You're just a white supremacist. What do you
think? Absolutely. Yeah. How did you figure that one out?
Okay. Am I allowed to know? What are we talking about next week?
Yeah. So when you went through those lists of topics, man, the one, I don't know why at first I was kind of like, yeah, and then it just boom, McCarthyism. Yes. I think it's so relevant to where we are today. I think there's a lot that people can learn about what hysteria looks like. I mean, we were just kind of talking about that with the war on Trump. I think it would be fascinating to look at like who was in our government during that period of time, what powers were granted to government, what all went. I just was fascinated by thinking about the potential for that episode. So I think that's going to be a really interesting, fun episode.
Oh, this is going to be fun. I'm going to go through this history textbook and see what they say about. I mean, I can pretty much guess, probably close to verbatim what they're going to say. But do they ever ask, well, was he right? Were there communists in the government? That will be a fun one to tackle. All right, good. I'm glad to hear that. McCarthyism next week.
Yeah, I'm excited for it.
All right. Well, we want to thank everybody for listening, and we will see you next week talking about Senator Joe McCarthy, Wisconsin. Was he Wisconsin?
Yeah.
All right, Senator Joe McCarthy from Wisconsin. Again, thanks for listening. And you've now heard The Other Side.